Welcome to our session support for disabled students in higher education. As my name is Kelly Self and I am the project coordinator for an organisation called HEP. We are the Higher Education Progression Partnership, and we are collaboration funding partners with the University of Sheffield and Sheffield Hallam, who we have on the call today. Each individual person that is presenting today will introduce themselves as they go through the presentation. So we go out and visit lots of schools, speaking to students, but also staff as well, like yourselves, and we provide that information to help make informed choices. But for today, we're talking about disabled students in higher education. So the session content is all about accessibility. It's understanding that higher education is accessible, and terminology, clarifying that different terminology, as the terminology used in school is slightly different in higher education. We want to talk to you about that support that's out there, and then the disabled students allowance as well, and how you can encourage your students to apply for that, and then a bit of guidance providing supporting disabled students as they consider that higher education journey. Okay, I am now going to pass you over to my colleague Jackie. Thanks, Jackie.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Jackie Reaney. I'm the Higher Education Disability Advisor at Barnsley College University Centre. Long phrase. We all have quite long titles, but they all mean the same things. I'm going to begin by a bit of an introduction to the shift in language between pupils at school or at college and moving into the university sector. So when you get to level 4, all the language around support issues changes. And I don't want people to be worried about that, because in essence, it's the same drive to make things fair for all students, but it's just the language that's different. So some of the changes, we are now known as, in universities, we are talking about disabled students. The word disability is claimed by us very forcefully because it goes back to remind people that we're part of legislation. In the 90s, so 30 years ago, the idea of this framework of support came out, and we kept the disabled students label, if you like, because Disability Discrimination Act had just gone through, and we wanted to flag up the fact that our students with different disabilities or health needs would still be covered by the law. They would still be within that framework of disability. And indeed, when the Equality Act came out in 2010, the disabled students cohort became part of that Equality Act. So we still raise it as a flag to remind ourselves and our applicants that we have a legalistic framework to ensure that our students are delivered to fairly and in accordance with the law. So disabled students are not probably what you would think of as out in society disability. Within the education system, disabled students include anyone who has a diagnosis of something that will impact upon how they study, where they study, when they study, the duration of studies, the comfort of their studies, the access around their studies. So if there is a disability or a health issue or a mental health issue that interferes with or impacts upon how each student accesses their studies, then they can become part of that disability service that we're offering, and they can access us. So the SENDCo on the second line will become ourselves. We're the disability advisors, sometimes known as disability coordinators. We each do the same job. There is a team within each university. Because I'm at Barnsley College, there is only one of me, but in most universities, there's a whole team who work within the context of being disability advisors, and we do the same. We follow the same process. And in that way, a student's journey can move seamlessly from one university to another. So if they move over to do year 2 in a different university, the whole process has gone across with them, and the delivery will be, as far as possible, seamless. So the SEN, or Learning Support Team, that your colleges and your schools will have will invite students into now becomes the disability service, part of inclusion sometimes, or part of a wellbeing service. So you might have to hunt around a little bit in each university to find it, but it will have that tag of disability rather than additional learning support. I have known students spend 3 years at a university looking for additional learning support. Where is it? There isn't one here. There is, it's just called disability. So try not to get hung up about the phrasing. It includes every student who would be entitled to that support. In schools and colleges, learners don't essentially need a full diagnosis to receive extra time in their exams or a separate room, but that changes when they get to university. It's to do with the fact that Student Finance England are administering this fund, and because they're often buying equipment up to the value of £5,000 for a student, then they need to be very sure that there is a long-term diagnosis or some medical evidence around it. So they do, Student Finance England will require us to provide evidence of a disability or a health issue or a mental health issue such as anxiety or depression if there is some evidence around something that will impact on a student's access of their studies. Then that's what we need to get access to the DSA. It's not money, it's not part of a income related thing, so it's not means tested, it's not about a loan, and it's not paybackable. The DSA, Disabled Students Allowance, is a pot of funding which Student Finance England will offer us in order to buy maybe printers and scanners and maybe a new laptop, software, recording devices, a whole load of kit that will provide a more comfortable and more flexible journey for the student. And the study mentors are covered by the cost of this, and study coaches. So everything that can be built around the student as support is part of that DSA, Disabled Students Allowance. And finally, just to mention the EHCP, which many of your students will have, don't be disappointed when we're told that the EHCP isn't relevant in universities. It is as background information, because it will provide us with a bit of information about where the student's journey has taken them through college or schooling, but it doesn't hold that same weight in itself. That is replaced by Disabled Students Allowance and by the reasonable adjustment reports we put in. Now, when we're talking about evidence, the EHCP can stand as evidence of autism. So if an applicant has a diagnosis of autism, we can use that EHCP if that diagnosis is mentioned in it. However, if we sent in evidence of an EHCP which included James is autistic, James has dyslexia and also has bipolar, the response from Student Finance England would be, we accept the evidence of autism, but you will need alternative evidence to support dyslexia and to support the bipolar. So it's very prescriptive, and we can only use the EHCP to identify and to confirm a diagnosis of autism. Okay, next slide. So we started quite high then with a lot of myths, but basically disability services and disability teams are a resource within every university or higher education college. We sit within that legal framework, and we work for our students throughout their 3 to 4 years. And we, if you like, mitigate between their course needs and their performance on the course and what adjustments need to be made and recommendations made. So we will help students to access their DSA, but we're also there to be a focus to ensure that all our students with disabilities and health issues can access their courses and reach their full potential comfortably and without experiencing duress around a health issue. So the support is personalised. So there isn't a generic support plan. We work with each student to make sure they have recommendations around extra time they might need, or comfortable spaces they might need, or exam adjustments they might need. So the support is very personal to each individual student, and we use as a basis for that the evidence they bring in, plus the history of support they've known through school and college. Confidentiality, absolutely. We work with the student in confidence. So that means that medical evidence that is provided in order for the student to get access to the DSA fund is not shared with the course team. Medical evidence belongs to the student, sits with the student, and is not shared across the university. We create a support plan based on that, but the evidence itself, dyslexia reports, medical information, the purpose of that is to get to the funding, and that isn't shared broadly. Early contact at the bottom of there. When we say we want students to start this early, we really don't mean in September, because the forms for 26, 27 came out yesterday. So the applications can begin for September starts now. If students, applicants wait until September and begin the process, because SFE have a kind of 2 to 3 month processing of information, if you start in September, quite often students haven't received their equipment and support by Christmas, and we don't want that to happen. So we start now, this minute, on speaking to our cohort of students who might be coming in September, and identifying areas of support and applying for DSA. Incidentally, students can apply without knowing their secure destination. So you can apply to any university, to DSA, and even if you shift your focus to another university, we would carry on with that process and move it forward. You don't have to know your host university at this point. You just have to know that you're applying somewhere, and then we can move it through. Thanks, Kelly. Next, please. So disability advisors, coordinators, each of us, we would be a point of contact. Often it's a team, and they would be the point of contact to access DSA and also to work with that student within the university. So it wouldn't be a matter of contacting your course team to get your extra time. It would be a matter of getting in touch with the disability service, who holistically would put together the support plan. It's not done through the course teams, it's done through that central service. So throughout the course, we can support our new applicants before they arrive, whilst they're here, and indeed if they switch courses or if their support needs switch. And we know students who maybe say, I didn't need a printer in the first year, but actually I really do need a printer now, mine is broken. So we could go back to the fund and ask for a revisit of that decision and go on claiming the DSA up to that point of maybe £5,000 worth of equipment. We do look at the support the students received at school and college. Of course we do, because that's where the sterling work has begun. We need to build on that. However, we work only with what the student wishes us to move forward. So if the student applicant doesn't mention that they're dyslexic, then we might not put in extra time for that student. A line is drawn beyond the college and the school, and as an adult sharing a disability, you start afresh, because each student starts afresh at their university, and we only know what they tell us. So we would only put in support that you would disclose to us, that the applicants disclose to us. We don't go back to look at the history of support you've had through school. And it's quite sad if a student were to say to us, but I've always had 25% extra time, why didn't I get that? That might be something that you've not shared with us at that point. So it has to come from the student to the disability service at some point in order for it to be actioned at the new university. So we're helping guide our students through a seeming complex DSA process from student finance, a step at a time. Don't be deterred by it. As well as that, we're also creating a comfortable environment within each university ourselves. Next one, please, Kelly. So the easiest way to track through the service is for an applicant to identify on their UCAS form. The UCAS forms come out in September, October. So in September or October, you might be working with applicants who would be invited to tick on the front page of their application, of their UCAS application, list a disability or notify a disability or disclose a disability. Do encourage them to do that. That isn't shared with course teams. It doesn't go to academic staff. The front sheet of each UCAS form hits the desk of the disability team, so that the minute we get an applicant ticking for next year, we start to compile our caseload and start to contact each one individually to explore what they would want out of it. So yes, start right at the beginning in September. It's never too late though. You know, if an applicant hasn't mentioned it so far, it's important just to flag up with the disability team that actually I didn't tell you, but I do have anxieties, or actually I never said anything, but I've got ME. Importance of disclosure. I think I've covered that already, but if the applicant doesn't disclose, we don't know about it. We can't go back and access that history, because your disability information is pertinent only to the student and is held by the student and isn't shared by other members of staff. So an easy way in, if you've got any questions with any of us, we all do the same job. So it's important that that you understand the system we're leading into in universities. It doesn't sound easy, but it is. It's just a different way of looking at the same delivery. Okay, thank you. I'm going to hand over to Alison now, who's a transition officer over at the University of Sheffield.
Thank you, Jackie. Yeah, so like Jackie just said, I'm the transition officer and I'm based in the Disability and Dyslexia Support Service at Sheffield University. My laptop fan is making a lot of noise. I don't know if anybody else can hear that. I'm just gonna, is it just me? Right, that's fine then. Okay, so in terms of who can access support, I think probably Jackie's already covered quite a bit of this, but essentially we refer to the Equality Act 2010 definition of disability. And again, in terms of what Jackie's already gone through, it's absolutely fine if an individual does not identify as being disabled. We will respect the language that each individual student uses in terms of discussing with us their support needs. But it is essentially about ensuring whether an individual student identifies as disabled or not, that they are covered under the Equality Act and therefore they have access to individual support and adjustments. So it gives them that protection within university. So in terms of specific diagnoses, that can include students with a specific learning difficulty, learning difference, anybody with a long-term mental health condition, long-term being likely to last for 12 months or more. Students with a long-standing illness or health condition, autistic students, students who have ADHD, students with a physical impairment or mobility difficulty, students with sensory impairments, and anybody with a speech, language or communication difficulty. We do, of course, support students with multiple diagnoses. So that information, diagnostic information, can be shared with us, it can be shared with DSA. We think with students anyway, holistically, in terms of, so when I'm meeting with a student who has multiple diagnoses, we're not thinking about in terms of, okay, let's talk about the impact of your specific learning difficulty, let's talk about the impact of your ADHD and try and kind of, you know, work out where the barriers might come from specifically. We think holistically with the student about what the potential barriers are and what some of the challenges might be. But yeah, that's a bit of a kind of checklist. It's not exhaustive, so there are other students. So, you know, if you're supporting or teaching a student that doesn't necessarily identify with anything on there, we would still encourage them to make contact with the disability service, including if they haven't had access to support previously, but would like to explore that in higher education. Okay, thanks, Kelly. So we keep talking about support. So in terms of what we actually mean by support, we mean providing the necessary study strategies to help the student to overcome potential barriers within the university environment. So barriers to their studies, to their independent study, to their access to their teaching. And it's all about supporting students to achieve their full academic potential when they're at university, and support them to have full access to all the different facilities that are available at uni. And hopefully for some students, it means that having access to our services can reduce some of their study anxiety, stress levels, and mean that they enjoy being here a bit more, hopefully. In all cases, in terms of the types of support that a student can have in place at university, that will be determined by their individual specific needs, their course, and also the support that's available at university. So it's not the case that, for example, all students with a specific learning difference will access the same type of support through a university disability service. There'll be some differences based on individual need, which is why we need students to have direct contact with those so that we can determine what that support is going to look like. The support that's available at university, there are differences across all universities for a number of reasons. In terms of what universities are doing, it's obviously about what we're doing as a disability service in terms of putting in place individual reasonable adjustments. So putting support in place at the individual level, making referrals, making recommendations, but it's also about the inclusive education practices that are adopted by all universities. So there will be some difference within that. As well. So, for example, a lot of universities now record their lectures as standard, so all students can have access to lecture recordings to support them with consolidating their learning, to support them with note taking. So there's some things that are, most universities have adopted, but there will still be some differences. So that's why it's important to research. It's why it's important to attend open days. I can't stress enough that potential applicants attend open days. I still see applicants that are making their decision based on what they've kind of researched in terms of the prospectus, but it's really important that students attend the university campus and really get a sense of where they want to be. I can't say that phrase. Especially, for kind of, in Sheffield, we are a very hilly city. And in terms of kind of, physical access to the city, it can be tricky for some students. So yes, on campus, most of our buildings are, all of our buildings are accessible, but navigating around the city can create additional barriers. So it's really important that applicants are making informed choices about where they want to study. So in terms of what I said, so Jackie's already said that. So some of the support in terms of individual support, reasonable adjustments, some of that support will be put in place by the university's disability service. And some of it will come through DSA, and we encourage students who are eligible for both to access both. There isn't really any kind of, there isn't really any downside to that other than with DSA. Yes, there's an admin process to go through, which Sarah will provide an overview of. But it's that's the way to ensure that students have access to maximum support is having contact with both the University Disability Service and applying for DSA. They'll still have complete control over the support that they eventually access. We say, in terms of DSA, say yes to everything and, make use of what you need as you need it. So, depending on individual needs, in terms of what support might include. So in terms of the first examples on the list, so these are the types of things that as a disability service we're thinking about with students. So we make the recommendations for exam adjustments. the process is quite different to what, in terms of what you might have to do in terms of JCQ evidence and gathering that evidence. A lot of what we do, once we've got confirmation that a student is eligible to access our service as a disabled student, what we are then doing is discussing with the student in terms of the exam environment, and also taking into consideration the support that they've accessed previously. So it's quite different in terms of, yes, we still need to be able to, as disability advisors, we still need to justify and ensure that the support we're putting in place is based on a disability related need, but we have that discussion with the individual and work that out with them in terms of how can we make sure they've got the best possible access to their exams. Learning support plans, learning contract, it will be called a different, the document will be called something different at a lot of universities, but essentially there will be a way that the disability service can communicate with academic departments to confirm that a student is considered to be a disabled student and is therefore eligible for support. So what we will do is provide some information about that student, give some context to the department as to what some of the barriers might be within university, and then make recommendations for how the academic department can support that student. In terms of face-to-face support, help with managing studies or to work on study skills. So that's referring to things like specialist mentoring and specialist study skills support. So for students who are eligible, they would access that through DSA, but there might be interim support that students can access if they arrive at university without DSA in place. If they're not eligible for DSA, then there'll be other types of university support available. And in terms of things like study skills, it's quite likely in terms, again, inclusive practice, there will be study skills support available for all students that, for example, a student with specific learning difficulty might make use of before their DSA support is finalised. Some of the support workers that a student might have contact with could be recommended through DSA, possibly, depending on the individual student and the reason that they're applying for DSA. But not everything is funded by DSA. So there are some types of support worker support that DSA doesn't fund. So, for example, if a student needs lab support or a library support worker, then it's considered that that should be support that's provided by the institution and not through DSA. And then some universities can provide diagnostic assessments for specific learning difficulties. So because students need a full diagnostic assessment for a specific learning difficulty, if that's the reason that they're applying for DSA, that's why some universities are able to refer students for that, but not all. So some don't have a referral process. Some do and fund it, some do part fund it. So again, research is important. In terms of specifically what DSA might provide support for, so if public transport, if getting to university on foot isn't possible for students, then a taxi allowance might be possible to cover the difference in cost between using a taxi and public transport. It's really important now that if that is a disability related need, that is stated very clearly on the evidence that a student provides to apply for DSA. So it's not enough now to discuss that with the DSA needs assessor, which Sarah will talk about. That needs to be evidenced earlier than it used to be. There's loads of potential specialist equipment that students can access through DSA, so assistive technology, potentially computing equipment, printer, and ergonomic study equipment. And then support workers, so types of support that might be funded through DSA include specialist study skills tutors, specialist mentors, or sign language interpreters. There are kind of caveats within that, as well as it being about based on the individual student's need. in terms of what DSA is able to approve, it does also depend on diagnostic evidence in terms of, for example, specialist study skills tutors wouldn't be available for all disabled students. It's something that could potentially be made available for students who are autistic, who have a specific learning difficulty, or who have ADHD. So even within the kind of label of disabled student, there are some differences in terms of what some students can and can't access through DSA. In terms of how to set up higher education disability support, so that's the disability service based within the university, we try and make it as straightforward as possible. It's really helpful if applicants complete the disability section on their UCAS form. The only thing that does is enable the disability service to receive the applicant's information so that they can share information with them over the summer. So for example, at Sheffield, around June time, we will be emailing all applicants who have ticked that box on UCAS. Some applicants are in touch with us already to start planning for September, but it does mean that that communication flow is guaranteed. If a student doesn't tick that, then they can have that direct contact, of course, with the disability service. We will need some diagnostic evidence, supporting information. Again, this will vary depending on universities. If a student is using evidence to apply for DSA and it's accepted by DSA, it's pretty likely it's going to be accepted by the university, because the bar tends to be higher in terms of what DSA need compared to what the universities need. But our advice is just to send whatever an applicant thinks they might have that confirms a diagnosis, and we'll advise them whether we need anything in addition to that. So send in whatever they have. And we can provide advice about how to access evidence if it's not sufficient. And have contact with us over the summer to discuss an action support. Come September, there's potentially going to be a wait to meet with disability advisors, coordinators, and some support takes time to set up. So it's really important that any student wanting to arrive at university with their support in place has contact with us in advance. And like Jackie said, we're not requesting any information from schools, colleges. We are very much relying on applicants to inform us that they wish to access support through our service. Okay, over to you, Sarah. Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. My name's Sarah Lamb. I'm a disability advisor at Sheffield Hallam University. Next slide, please. So I'm going to be talking to you a bit more about Disabled Students Allowance. This is a non-means tested government-funded allowance, and it's to cover the cost of specialist support. And that might be one-to-one support, equipment, software, excuse me, photocopying and printing, and for some a taxi allowance. So to access the maximum support, I definitely recommend getting in touch with the university's disability support service and applying for Disabled Students Allowance. Most UK students with appropriate evidence will be eligible, apart from some courses. So access courses and apprenticeships aren't eligible. But it's still worth getting into contact with your provider, because they may be able to offer you other support. So for apprenticeships, there is other support available, but it's not through DSA. So the beauty of applying for Disabled Students Allowance at this time of year is that it doesn't matter which institution you're going to. So students might think, well, I need to know where I'm going first, but you can set up your DSA support now. And then tweak it once you know which institution you're going to. And that definitely speeds up the process. There's no repayment. Like I said, it's a non-means tested fund. You don't get a pot of money, unfortunately. What you get is you get the support put in place based on a needs assessment. It doesn't affect your family benefits, and we'll talk more about accessing it. Next slide, please, Kelly. So what is the DSA application process? Well, you apply for Disabled Students Allowance when you apply for your student finance. You can apply for it at the same time or any point through your course. So for some students, they may get a diagnosis at a later point, or they may it may become clear that they've got a disability at a later point. And they apply for full-time undergraduate students, they apply online through the Student Finance England portal. And like Jackie said, that opened this week, so students can start applying for their tuition fee loan, their student loan, and also for their disabled students allowance. So the first thing to do is, once you've applied, is you then need to provide evidence. And for your students, it can be a variety of things. It can be a full diagnostic report, so for things like dyslexia, autism, ADHD, or it can be a working or probable diagnosis of autism as ADHD. So this is an acknowledgement that there's been really long waiting lists for diagnostic assessments for autism or ADHD. And the way that students provide that information is there's a form on the Student Finance England website, and they ask their GP to fill it in to say they've had a referral made, and that is sufficient for them to get DSA. If a student's disability impacts on their ability to use public transport, this needs to be stated very clearly in the medical evidence. They've really cracked down on the use of taxis through disabled students allowance. So what we need now is we need evidence, not just anecdotal evidence from the student, which we used to be able to use. Now we need it to specifically state that in the medical evidence. There needs to be a medical reason why they can't use public transport. So once that's been approved, they were then sent details of how to book a needs assessment, and this is a one-to-one appointment. It can be in person, online, or over the phone, and they will ask different questions about the impact of the disability on study. So they'll talk about note-taking, lectures, exams, that sort of thing, and then they will recommend support based on that. So that covers the support that comes through the DSA, and then after that they will get a letter with giving them instructions on how to accept and receive that support. So yeah, definitely start the DSA application process as soon as possible. So we've put here at the beginning of March, but it's actually this week, and it takes at least 3 months to complete. So you can begin without knowing which university you're going to, and that just gets the bulk of it down, and then there's just the course details that need tweaking. And there's some really useful information on the UCAS website about how to apply and access for DSA. So preparing for university and a bit of a checklist. So we encourage UCAS disclosure, and the reason for that is because it flags up to us, the teams within the university, that that students have a disability, and then we can start making contact with them and encouraging them to start accessing support. The next stage is to obtain required disability evidence, and on the link there it gives you a list of the different types of evidence that SFE will accept. For some students it will be a diagnostic report, for some it'll be a letter from their GP, for some it'll be something from their consultant, but it'll give you an idea, and they're quite clear about what information needs to be in that letter. It needs to be clear that it's either lasted 12 months or is going to last longer than 12 months. So some conditions that are on there, like a cancer diagnosis or long COVID, they're relatively, they're still eligible for disabled students allowance. Also check out the transition events that the universities are offering. At Hallam, we'll have a transition day for autistic students. Also, if you're required when you're applying for accommodation, mention that you've got a disability and specifying that. Universities are big organisations, so we're not always able to talk across teams because we're just so big and people tend to own a small process. So it's really important that people share that information where they can and where they're asked for it, really. And also thinking about preparing for independent living and self-advocacy. So students are going to have to speak up for themselves and seek out support, as well as balancing living independently, possibly for the first time. If students complete an application through clearing, if that's how they get their place, encourage a student to contact the disability service so then we can scoop them up and try and get as much support in place for September. It might not all be set up for September, given the timescales, and that's why if you know you're going to university, apply for DSA early, even if you don't know which course you're going to do. So like we've all said, setting up Support University and setting up DSA can take time. So many students contact us at different stages of your studies, but it's better to plan ahead. It makes things run a lot smoother. And back over to you, Alison. Sorry, not Alison, Kelly. Sorry.
Yes, so thank you everybody for your bits of the presentation. So we're just going to go through some final bits just of extra support that you can access. So we have a HEP hub, which is the website address here, that you can access lots of different resources. So we have all the recordings from our sessions. So we had a disabled students allowance session back in February that you can access that from there. And there is also this Here For You resource. In that resource is a pull-out section where you can take that, students can take that to open days so that they've got an idea of what they need to ask any of the disability advisors or coordinators at the institution. So on there, as I say, is lots of different information that is accessible and downloadable for yourselves and students to be able to access the information that they require. As mentioned, both of our partners have lots of different support for disabled students. At the University of Sheffield, it's about going onto their website and looking at that and speaking to colleagues like Alison, who will be able to help with that transition to the institution. And then Hallam has a programme called Hallam Progress, and that is lots of different support around accessing before they go to higher education, but also then transitioning into higher education as well. These are obviously these are our funding partners that we're talking about, but other institutions will offer support like this. So it's recommended, like everybody said today, that you do your research and you look into what support is out there for the young people attending higher education, whether that's at a college like Jackie's or a higher education university. Okay. So we are now to the end of the session. This is the time now for you to please ask any questions. We're going to go through the chat and ask those questions. While you're thinking of those questions, we are going to put up 2 more questions. One of them is exactly the same poll question that you did at the beginning, and then a second one. If you miss it on the screen, you can access it through the chat function. These are anonymous, so we can't see who's responded or what they've responded. So please do access those polls and fill them out. They are really helpful for us to look at our sessions and see how we can improve, and also what's been useful, so that we can make sure that they are relevant and up to date for you as individuals. And then what we'll do is, while you're answering those polls, I will go to the chat and see if we have got any questions. And then I will put our contact details on as well. Let's see. Doesn't look like we've got any questions at the moment, does it? We'll wait a few minutes for some questions. But as we say, if you've ever got any questions, whatever it is, just please forward it on to ourselves. If you want to send it to myself, that is absolutely fine. We will do our best. Between all of us, we tend to be able to answer the question. And for instance, with DSA, we can always connect with student finance who can help us as well. So we do have a lot of people that can answer those questions. So don't sit on them, because that can be more stressful for everybody. Please do ask. We're more than happy to help you there. But thank you for joining us this afternoon.